Perfect. Also, when we ask you questions, it's most helpful for us if you include the subject in the question. So, for example, if I say like, "What's your name?" and you say, "My name," like it'd be most helpful if you say, "My name is," blah, blah, blah. Or if I ask like, "What is racism?" I'm not gonna ask what is racism, but what is racism? You're gonna say, "Racism is," instead of like "it is" or something like that. Would
Okay.
be most
Yep.
helpful for us. Perfect.
Got you.
All right, Jill, we're ready to go.
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so question number one, what's your name?
My name is Khadijah Kelly.
Can you say and spell that for me one more time?
Sure, my name is Khadijah Kelly. That's Kadijah. Kelly, Kelly.
Perfect, great. So what's your position at Lawrence?
I'm actually the staff counselor there in the Wellness Center. So my position is the staff counselor in the Wellness Center, sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's try one more time.
Okay. My position at Lawrence University is the campus counselor here.
So what does that entail? What do you do as part of your job?
Just therapy work with the students on campus. So depending on kind of what the issues are that students are having, they'd come in my office and have, and we'd have a session.
Just as kind of an example of how to rephrase it, instead of saying something like "it is," this
Yes.
should be like, and no, that's okay. That's why we ask these easy questions, right? Just for this reason. But
They give you some practice.
yeah, so for sure.
Okay.
So what do you like about your job?
I've always liked the advocacy piece of my job, and just making sure that the folks that need the services that they need get the help that they need. So that's what I love about counseling.
What do you dislike about your job?
Nothing. I think the challenge with my job is probably the lack of resources sometimes for some of the clients that I see.
Great. So have you okay, how do I phrase this question? I'm going off the script here, so.
Yep. Yeah.
Do you do a lot of people of color come to you with concerns about, I guess, being a person of color here at Lawrence?
I think that I do have a high number of students of color coming to see me, and I think, especially because of the campus climate, regarding just the racial tensions within the campus and within the community.
What is the racial climate that's on campus? Can you describe that?
Well, what I've heard is that they're in, through conversations through the students of color, is the sense of just white folks just not getting it sometimes. Some of the white folks on campus not getting it, and really, unfortunately, having conversations that can come across as racial microaggressions, which can be very detrimental to students within that within that classroom sometimes. So it's professors, it's some of their friends through conversations, things of that nature.
What is a racial microaggression?
A racial microaggression is a behavior that is exhibited when folks are unintentionally or intentionally trying to talk about something regarding a stereotype that they feel is taking place within a person of color. So for example, say that I go to one of my white friends and I say, you know what, I just got followed in the store, and I can't believe that happened, and I know it's because I was black, because I didn't see them following anyone else. And a racial microaggression would be my white friend replying, well, how do you know it's because you're black? How do you know it's just that they're not doing that with everyone else? Now, very unintentional, and my friend probably wanted me to kind of feel better and not feel bad about the situation. The reality is that was my experience as a black woman walking in that store, and it would have been better for her to validate that event.
What kind of microaggressions happen on campus?
I've heard a couple of times where professors have looked upon a black student as if they spoke for the black race. That's a racial microaggression. Generalizing a black student, calling them by a different black student's name and doing it several times without really taking the initiative or kind of the time to really get to know that student. So just some generalized behaviors regarding like how some of the professors may see some of these students of color.
Okay, great. We're going to shift gears a little bit.
Okay, sure.
So, you know about last fall the demands and concerns that were published and brought to the university. Can you kind of tell me about the events that led up to the publishing of those demands?
So I'm not a student, so I don't quite know where they were coming from. I do know that when there's a list of demands, and the swiftness of it, with wanting them out the way they did, that normally is a result of folks feeling like they have not been heard, or folks feeling like there has been some type of injustice. And so my assumption, and coming on a personal level as a Black person, I'm thinking, and I'm thinking that the students did that because of that, just wanting to be heard and wanting folks to be accountable for their behaviors.
So you live here in Appleton, is that correct?
I live in Neenah.
In Neenah,
But
okay.
yeah, yep.
Are you from this area?
No, originally from Detroit. However, I've been in Wisconsin for over 10 years, so I've been in Neenah for about 3.
So what's it like living here in Appleton?
Living in Appleton. Again, as a Black woman, I don't go out too much. I try not to, just because of just the community and the environment. So I really try to keep to myself. I don't necessarily feel unsafe when I'm around certain people. However, there have been certain incidents where like I didn't feel safe.
And you don't have to answer this question if you
Yep.
don't want to.
Mhm.
But can you describe some of those instances for me where you might have felt unsafe or uncomfortable?
So I'm trying to like give you the example without it being very. So I had an incident where myself and one of my friends were pulled over, and we just weren't treated as kindly as I thought we should have been treated. And I felt that it was race related. However, that's not something that I have no proof of that or evidence. So, but that experience was really rough for me.
I guess how do things like that make you feel when you living in this community and being a part of it? How does that make you feel when those kind of things happen?
Angry. Just angry and frustrated, upset that there are folks in power that have the opportunity to really change those things that, for me, in my eyes, I don't see happening. And those are just, and that's a big incident, right? But there's these small racial microaggressions that happen when I'm in this community. And it is the getting followed in the store, or, getting asked for my ID versus if somebody's in line in front of me, not seeing them get asked for their ID. So there's these things that constantly kind of happen that just makes me angry.
So I guess what's it like living in Appleton compared to back in Detroit? It's a big question.
It was way more multicultural in Detroit, and not that I don't think, obviously racism is everywhere. I don't think that it was as overt as it was here. I didn't sense it, I didn't feel it, and I actually did not recognize it until I came to Wisconsin. So I do miss it. Just very diverse, really diverse.
Okay, fantastic. So I guess one of the things that's been that we've talked about that's in the front of a lot of conversations is trying to make areas more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean to you? What does inclusive mean to you?
Okay, so I've had this conversation before. So what does inclusive mean to me? Inclusivity to me really means inviting everyone into conversation, everyone at the table. It means really allowing everyone to have a chance to talk and speak and give their views and all of those things. And for me, that's a good thing. However, it's a challenge for me when I hear that language, just because I feel like it's also allowing folks that may be racist in that circle. So, just scary sometimes to hear that word.
Well, can you explain a little bit more what's so scary about that one?
Because when folks say, I want this to be inclusive, I want, like if they say, I want this class, so for example, if someone says, I want this classroom to be inclusive, which means that everyone gets to have a say and everyone gets to speak their mind, which is great because you don't want to stifle that growth. However, say there is a racist person within that classroom that allows them the opportunity to spew hate. And for me, I feel like, we really have to be careful with that language and make sure that we really take the time to know that there are students of color within that space when you talk about inclusiveness.
Is there a better term you think that could be used?
Anti-racist work, yeah.
I guess kind of following that in, then what does that mean to be anti-racist?
To be anti-racist means combating and fighting against white supremacy system, white fragility, white guilt, white shame, all of those things, but really the white supremacy system, and making sure that you can dismantle that.
How does the white supremacy system show in everyday life?
Well, white supremacy system is based on a system that really benefits and white people within that system. So basically dismissing the marginalized groups within that system, dismissing them because of that, because of them being marginalized, and thinking that the white people that they're serving are better.
Great. So I guess what can be done to make Lawrence more anti-racist?
Wow. Just not be racist, right? That's what I would hope. I guess for me, because my passion is behind anti-racist work, it would be just acknowledging that there is racism on campus. There is. And then really also acknowledging that there's white privilege on this campus. And once you can do that, then you can really come across, then transparency comes out. And then you can start working on, okay, what does that mean? Okay, now that I've owned my white privilege, how is it, what's the next step? And that would be really trying to educate yourself on just anti-racist work, which would mean, talking about the white fragility, talking about white guilt, talking about white shame. And I think a lot of times what happens is, and the challenge with some white folks that don't do anti-racist work, is that this guilt comes in, and then there's this denial where we came this far, right? So then why do we have a list of demands? At least they're getting an education, right? These students of color. And the reality is that in that classroom, they're not getting the same education as their white counterparts. So it's basically really making sure that that white folks really own that white privilege and then work from there.
Great. No, that was awesome.
Yep.
Could you talk a little bit about white guilt and white shame? Maybe define those things
Yep.
for us?
Okay. So white guilt normally shows up when someone is challenged about their white privilege. So then they start feeling guilty that they're white as a white individual. Well, I feel so bad that, white people did this in the past. And the reality is that generationally, they weren't a part of that. Someone my age was not a part of that, of slavery, right? But then this white guilt comes in, which can really paralyze that conversation because they're stuck, it's about them and not about me explaining an experience as a black person. The white shame creeps in normally when, and this is on a personal level, when I've had conversations with white people who have not done anti-racist work. White shame comes in when they've actually been called out, and then there's this defensiveness that takes place. And so it's, well, my intentions weren't, my intentions were not to generalize black people, Khadijah, when I told you that all black people do this. The reality is that although the intentions weren't there, the impact still hurts. And so that white shame comes in. I don't know, did you ask me about white fragility or no? I can't remember.
Go ahead and talk about
I'm sorry,
Go for it.
I didn't know. And white fragility is something that creeps up when I'm talking with a white person who is not doing anti-racist work. And so we may be having a conversation and it gets very fragile within that room. So they start to close up and they start to, they'll tear up a little bit if I'm talking about an experience of racism. What happens is and I have physically and mentally seen this, where they will shut down and not want to really share that experience with me, even though I may be in pain regarding some racist act that has taken place against me.
So what can people do in their normal lives, in their day-to-day lives, to be anti-racist? I know it's a big question.
Well, yeah. Here's the thing. I think that folks have to distinguish what social justice is versus what racial justice is, and really distinguish the two so that they can really have that platform for racial justice, which means that in order to dismantle racism, you really have to acknowledge that it's there, and you have to kind of own how you played a part in that system that really mothered racism, and understand that everyone wins. Like, it's just not for white folks to learn, it's also for folks of color to really make sure that they're educating themselves so that they, don't buy into that white supremacy system where they start to internalize that racism. And so I think it really requires this finesse of folks wanting to own kind of how they play a role in that, and then going from there.
Perfect. So how can Lawrence work in the greater Appleton community for anti-racism and racial justice?
I think with Lawrence, one of the things that they can do to combat racism within the community is really stepping forward when they see some injustice that takes place with students of color, or faculty of color, or staff of color, which means that, at the end of the day, they may not be liked, but they'll be respected. And so we know with any movement, it doesn't happen with CEOs, it happens with the community. And I think the community they've already spoken, which is the students of color, which means that now the folks in positions of power really need to have those conversations, those really uncomfortable conversations with folks in power. So that may mean talking to the mayor, right? And really figuring out, how do we protect these students of color when they're walking across the street, or if they're on College Ave or whatever the case may be. That may mean talking with the police chief and really explaining kind of the degree of how severe their safety is in jeopardy here when these students of color are walking in the community. And it may mean really educating the professors on just racial microaggressions, racial micro-insults, all of these things, really educating them to the point where it looks like anti-racist, and including inclusivity, but really that anti-racist work matters.
Fantastic. Joe, do you have anything else that you want to ask?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about denial of experience and validation of experience, and sort of how that plays out and how it maybe should play out?
So denial as in, like, if a person of color is telling an experience and they get, and there's a denial there? Okay. Am I still looking at you?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the difference I think what happens when a person of color is coming to a white individual and they're telling them about an experience, and for the example that I gave you earlier, me being followed in the store as a black person, when a white person denies that experience, when they say, well, are you sure that that happened? And they're questioning it and they need facts and and this is the thing, and this is what happens with actually black folks. This is on a personal level for me, is that we need this backstory to explain kind of our situation versus if it was a white individual that came to the other white individual, there would be this empathy right away. It would just happen. I've seen it happen. And so that sense of knowing that that happens with my white counterparts and then and getting that denied, kind of this dismissive kind of denial of my experience is painful. And it really reinforces that thought that I'm less than as a black person. So that's what happens each time a black person comes in front of a white person and they deny that experience. Each time they're chipping away at their mental health, which is a huge thing. And not that they necessarily have statistics behind that. However, on a professional level, seeing the students of color that I see, their mental health is really declining because of that. Now, if you combat that with validation, so if a black or if a student of color comes to a white individual and they are given that validation, then they walk away from that experience feeling like they feel important. They feel like that the person cares about what happens to them, and that's going to give a different kind of like air about how they feel about themselves and about the community that they live in.
Could you maybe go into a little more detail about why microaggressions and denial, like what sorts of effects that has on the mental health of students?
Sure. So what happens with when somebody is faced with racial microaggressions, what happens is it basically breaks down their psyche. So basically it can cause them to go into depression, and it can cause them to go into anxiety because of just this sense of not feeling important, not feeling as a human, and not feeling as if anyone cares about you. And if you are constantly hit with that throughout your everyday life, so say for example for me as a black woman, I live in Neenah. My neighborhood is predominantly white. So as soon as I walk out my door, before I even walk out, when I wake up, I literally have to put on like armor. I have to know that I'm gonna probably get hit with about 10 racial microaggressions before I even enter my office. So what happens is I get in my car, I go to the gas station. Right there, a racial microaggression is gonna take place. And this has happened where not only in the store is there a representation of the Confederate flag, but there's these all lives matter. Then there's I'll shoot first and ask later. And everyone knows that Black Lives Matter is happening right now with this movement. So right there, that's sending me a sign, the store that I'm in. So racial microaggression, not intentional, maybe, maybe not. Maybe they don't have that many black folks going into their store, but that's gonna hit me, boom. So then I'm hit with that. Now I have to feel kind of like on guard. So I walk up to the counter and another racial microaggression. The cashier behind the counter is very rude to me. And I can see already while I was standing in line that he was super nice to this white lady that was in front of me. But all of a sudden I'm an inconvenience. And very like, well, throwing my money on the counter, those kind of things. Maybe not intentional, but a racial microaggression. So then I get into my car, I'm on my way to work and I see a cop. And now I'm like on guard. Not only did I see the Confederate flag, and then now this guy was upset with me because of my race, now I see a cop. And I already know the tension that's happening between cops and black folks. So now I'm scared. So the cop follows me, not intentional, but right there, that's gonna get me really like riled. It's just gonna get me scared. So eventually I get to the office, I get to my parking lot, and now I'm like really up in guards because now I have to cross the street. And I already know that there's a chance that there's a huge chance that somebody is gonna say the N-word when I cross the street, or I might get hit. So now I gotta walk across the street, and I have to really on guard. And now my mental health is kind of like, it's playing with me because I've seen too many of these racial microaggressions taking place. And now I have to go into my office and I go up and, I'm going into the building and there's a white student right there sitting behind the desk and they don't say hi to me. Not intentional, right? This may just be a white student that's just busy with schoolwork. But because of all those racial microaggressions that have taken place before I even walked into that building, now I'm on guard. Now I'm questioning things. And this is what's happening with our black and brown students, our students of color. So then I finally go into my office and I relax, and that's like my sanctuary. And I can take a breather, but guess what? Now I work with all white folks. Not intentional, right? They deserve their jobs, but that environment doesn't look like me. There's no representation of me. And so this is what's happening with our students of color when they are hit with these, like, really these racial microaggressions, to the point where if it's happening every day, then their mental health just declines because they can't focus. They can't function within the classroom. They can't complete assignments, and they start to isolate themselves. And these are all symptoms of depression and anxiety. Does that help?
Yeah,
That was fantastic.
how do you feel about the students that are doing racial justice work on campus?
Okay. I think for me, I'm like super duper proud that these students are doing racial justice work. I think the students of color don't get enough credit for the activism that they're doing and the racial justice work that they're doing. And I think that there are very few white anti-racist aspiring allies. Now, there are white allies on campus that are doing work. I don't know if they're incorporating that anti-racist work, and that's what scares me. I do see some doing that work, but I'm extremely proud of the students really standing up and demanding what they need, something that is really like doable, and something that should have been provided to them a while ago.
What's the difference between a white ally and a white anti-racist?
Yep. Okay, so a white ally is a white person that is doing the job of an ally for anyone and everyone, which is good. What happens, though, is that if you don't add the anti-racist to the white ally, that's when the racial microaggressions take place within those conversations or within their responses. And I think, folks